The space between two men on a bench is a country with its own laws. Myung-ho and Sejun sat within it, the river carrying their shadows downstream, as if to test whose would return first. "You always come here," Sejun finally said. It was not accusation, only discovery. Myung-ho closed the notebook. "It's where unfinished sentences go to wait." Sejun smiled faintly. "Grandma liked this river." She said it reminded her that nothing keeps what it carries. Silence again, thicker this time, but kinder. "You wrote something just now," Sejun said. "A draft of accountability," Myung-ho replied. "That sounds heavy." "It is. Which is how I know I need it." They watched a plastic bottle spin in the current, trapped briefly in a whirlpool before escaping toward the sea. "Do you ever feel like," Sejun said slowly, "we lived in the same family but different versions of it?" "All the time," Myung-ho answered. "You lived in the margins. I lived in the footnotes." Sejun laughed under his breath. "Your footnotes owned the house." Myung-ho lowered his eyes. "Not anymore." That evening, Sejun followed him back to Malsun's home. For the first time without being summoned, the shelter hummed with its new, borrowed life children practicing multiplication at the long table, the director negotiating shoe donations on the phone, soup steaming with the honest impatience of garlic and anchovy. Yoon-jung noticed them at the door. "You came together," she said, surprised. "We walked," Sejun replied. "It turns out the city connects things without asking permission." At dinner, they ate as workers eat without ceremony, all elbows and refills. A small boy dropped rice on the floor. Kyulsu swept it without comment. A girl asked Sujin whether numbers ever got lonely. Sujin answered as if this were the most serious question in the world. Later, while the shelter folded into sleep, Myung-ho opened the bottom drawer again. The cassette recorder rested there like a held breath. He did not press play. Some proofs were meant to be carried, not replayed. Instead, he took out his notebook. Second will revision 1-6. If someone enters my house asking for shelter, I must decide quickly. Delay is a cousin of refusal. 7. If wealth gathers, it must do what water does, move, support. Wait, carve paths for others. 8. If my name is used falsely, I will repair the harm before I defend the name. 9. If I am forgiven, I will build something to justify the miracle. 10. If I remember my mother, I will not turn her into marble. He closed the book when footsteps approached. It was Yoon-jung. "You're rewriting yourself," she said. "I'm trying to read myself honestly for the first time." She leaned against the doorframe. "The shelter needs money. Not urgently but inevitably. Pipes, food, paperwork. You know how institutions age." He nodded. "Then let it age with dignity." The words startled both of them with how easily they arrived. The next morning, Myung-ho went to his office. Not as a commander, but as a defector of his former habits. His secretary's desk was empty now, a polite vacancy where intentions once disguised themselves as help. He called in the finance director. "I need a foundation," he said. "Quiet, transparent, boring." "Those are the best kind," the director replied. "It will support exactly one thing at first," Myung-ho continued. "A shelter on a hill near the sea. No naming rights. No plaques bigger than a notebook." The director hesitated. "May I ask why the anonymity?" "My mother taught me that good shelters don't advertise the storm." Paperwork began its slow migration across desks that day. Accounts shifted shape. Assets unlearned their previous addresses. By evening, he stood again at the river, as if the water were the only witness he trusted with beginnings. At Malsun's home, change arrived not as announcement but as equipment. New pipes were installed. Leaks vanished. The pantry grew without spectacle. The director did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. Yoon-jung noticed the children slept more peacefully. It was a subtle improvement, like the difference between a borrowed blanket and one that actually fits. Sejun began coming every evening after work. He helped the older boys with homework. He listened more than he spoke. Once, when a girl asked what his job was, he said, "Learning to stay." One night on the roof, under the startled stars, the siblings gathered again. "She really left us a second estate," Kyulsu said. "Not houses. Instructions. Blueprints for behavior," Sujin added. "For unfinished people," Yoon-jung said softly. Wind passed through laundry lines like a choir practicing forgiveness. Below them, the sea pressed the same argument it always had against the rocks. "That persistence is a form of faith." Myung-ho listened, then spoke. "I used to think the wall was something you read at the end. Now I think it's something you live out loud." No one disagreed. From the far side of the roof, one of the children called out, "Is that the moon or a streetlight?" Yoon-jung smiled. "Sometimes they look alike. The important thing is they both help you find your way home. And somewhere beneath that light, borrowed or celestial, It didn't matter. A second testament quietly began to take effect, not in the registry of the state, but in the unguarded ledger of human use. Chapter 7. The river does not keep accounts. Spring arrived without permission. It slipped under doors, climbed the breadths of chimneys, and rearranged the color of Malsun's home one petal at a time. The children began leaving their shoes outside without being told. Windows stayed open longer. Even the buildings seemed to exhale. The shelter had learned the rhythms of its new normal: mornings of rice and attendance sheets, afternoons of study and arguments over pencils, evenings of soup and borrowed songs from an old radio. What had once felt temporary now practiced the grammar of permanence. Yoon-jung kept a notebook in the director's office. It was not a ledger in the legal sense, no columns of debt or credit, but it tracked other currencies. Which child feared the dark? Which woman flinched at loud voices? Who needed silence more than advice? She called it the living register. On one of the first warm afternoons, she noticed a new line forming at the bottom of the page almost by itself. Trust is recovering. Slowly. That same afternoon, Myung-ho stood outside the foundation's newly rented office, staring at a blank signboard. The landlord asked what name should go up. He hesitated. No family names. Then what? Just call it the Second Foundation. The landlord laughed. Second after what? Myung-ho thought of a woman with a kettle, a pen, and a will that weighed less than kindness yet bent a family's entire future. After everything that failed the first time, paper accepted this answer more readily than people would. But paper was patient. Inside the shelter, Sejun was learning how not to leave. It was harder than it sounded. He had perfected the art of departure long before he understood the cost of staying. Now, each evening, he lingered on purpose, waiting for dishes to dry, lights to be turned off, conversations to end naturally instead of conveniently. One night, a boy named Menjae asked him, "Are you like us now?" Sejun knelt to his height. "Like you in what way?" "You live here in pieces," the boy said seriously. "You come back even when nobody calls you." Sejun felt the truth touch him somewhere behind the ribs. "Then yes," he said. "In pieces." The boy considered this and nodded, satisfied. The river had begun to rise with snowmelt from the northern hills. Myung-ho visited it less frequently now, as if the water had done its work and released him from daily confession. When he did come, he no longer wrote commands to himself. He watched. Watching, he was learning, was also a form of obedience. One evening, Sujin joined him there unannounced. She stood beside the bench without sitting. "You're changing," she said. "So are you." She smiled faintly. "I changed first. I changed when I realized balance sheets can't measure what survives." He closed his notebook without looking inside it. "The foundation papers are filed." Quietly. "No press." "Good," she replied. Mother hated applause. It interrupted her thinking. They stood together while the river continued its unreported work of moving everything. It touched closer to somewhere else. At Malsun's home, the first inspection from the city arrived mid-April. The inspector was young, precise, and allergic to sentiment. He tested the smoke alarms. He measured stair railings. He frowned at a door that swung inward instead of out. Yoon-jung followed him with answers prepared. Then the inspector paused at the children's study room. The walls were covered with awkward drawings. Houses with legs, oceans inside teacups. In the corner, someone had drawn an old woman with enormous hands holding up the roof of a building. The inspector stared at it longer than procedure allowed. "Who drew that?" he asked. A small girl raised her hand. "That's the lady who built this house." The inspector cleared his throat. He signed the approval. That night, they celebrated with tangerines and instant noodles. Dressed as feast food, Kyil-soo cooked as if the building itself were a guest. Music erupted from the radio and fell apart into laughter. Halfway through each chorus, Yoon-jung watched it all from the doorway and thought, this is what inheritance looks like when it refuses to behave. Later, long after the children were chased into beds, Myung-ho found his siblings gathered at the kitchen table. An envelope lay between them. "What is it now?" he asked, gently wary. Kyil-soo slid it across. "Property tax rebate. Retroactive. House 3. They reassessed last year's zoning." Mia,